Coming up on 5 Minute News. Biden and Putin agree to steps on cybersecurity and arms control. Iran election race narrows, but fears persist of low turnout. And Kamala Harris launches campaign for voting rights across the US. It's Thursday, June 17. I'm Anthony Davis. US President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed on Wednesday to begin cybersecurity and arms control talks at a summit that laid bare their deep discord on those issues, human rights and Ukraine. In their first meeting since he took office in January, Biden asked Putin how he would feel if a ransomware attack hit Russia's oil pipelines, a pointed question referencing the May shutdown of a pipeline that caused disruptions and panic buying along the US East Coast. While Biden stressed that he did not make threats during the 3-hour meeting, he said he outlined US vital interests, including on cybersecurity, and made clear to Putin that the United States would respond if Russia infringed on those concerns. Both men used careful pleasantries to describe their talks in a lakeside Swiss villa, with Putin calling them constructive and without hostility, and Biden saying there was no substitute for face-to-face discussions. They also agreed to send their ambassadors back to their capitals. Russia recalled its envoy after Biden said in March that he thought Putin was a killer, and the United States recalled its ambassador soon after. Putin said on Wednesday that he had been satisfied by Biden's explanation of the remark. But there was no hiding their differences on issues such as human rights, where Biden said the consequences for Russia would be devastating if jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny died, or cyberspace, where Washington has demanded Moscow crack down on ransomware attacks emanating from Russian soil. Iran grappled with fears of low voter turnout 2 days ahead of its presidential election, as the race narrowed on Wednesday into a showdown between the country's hardline judiciary chief and moderate former central bank chief. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei warned of a foreign conspiracy to undermine the vote, while the country's interior ministry acknowledged a startling lack of competition that was turning the election into a coronation for Khamenei's protege, hardliner Ebrahim Raisi. In an extensive televised speech, Khamenei railed against the media's grim portrayal of the poll and tried to cajole people into voting, warning of increased pressure from Iran's enemies if citizens stay away from the polls on Friday. Iran's clerical vetting body had barred a range of prominent reformists and key allies of relatively moderate President Hassan Rouhani to run in this election, giving the green light to just Raisi and several low-profile candidates, mostly hardliners, with little popular support. The Guardian Council's evisceration of any viable challengers has sparked widespread criticism and fueled calls for a boycott. Voter apathy was running deep even before the disqualifications, due in part to the devastated economy and subdued campaigning amid a surge in coronavirus cases. The state-linked Iranian student polling agency most recently projected a 42% turnout from the country's 59 million eligible voters, which would be an historic low. US Vice President Kamala Harris on Wednesday promoted the Biden administration's efforts to advance voting rights when she met 16 fellow Democrats from the Texas state legislature, who successfully blocked a bill they said would make it harder for blacks and Hispanics to vote. President Joe Biden appointed Harris this month to lead the charge against Republican state lawmakers across the country seeking to enact voting restrictions. White House and civil rights groups say the Republican-led efforts would make it harder for Americans to vote. It follows former Republican Donald Trump's false claim that he lost the 2020 election to Biden because of widespread fraud. So far, 14 other US states have enacted 22 laws this year that make it more difficult for Americans to vote, according to a report by the Brennan Center for Justice. Democrats in the Texas State House walked out on a legislative session last month to deprive Republicans of a quorum needed to pass a voting bill. Texas Governor, Republican Greg Abbott, has vowed to bring the legislature back in a yet-to-be-called special session. Under the Texas proposal, drive-through voting would no longer be allowed, early voting would be limited, 24-hour polling sites would be scrapped, and absentee ballots would be more difficult to cast. Critics say such measures keep many black and Hispanic voters, traditional supporters of Democrats, from the polls. Harris plans to bring together elected officials and concerned Americans to build a coalition to work on voting rights, and will seek legislation that improves access to the ballot box. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland has said his Justice Department will aggressively enforce voting rights, prosecute threats against election officials, double the number of prosecutors devoted to the issue, and closely examine how states conduct their elections. You can subscribe to 5 Minute News on YouTube with your preferred podcast app. Ask your smart speaker or enable 5 Minute News as your Amazon Alexa flash briefing skill. Subscribe, rate and review online at 5minute.news. 5 Minute News is an Evergreen Podcast covering politics, inequality, health and climate, delivering independent, unbiased and essential world news daily.